This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Here we are in day 6 of the federal government shutdown. On Capitol Hill in Washington, Republican and Democratic lawmakers are showing few, if any, meaningful signs of negotiations that could break through this impasse. Meanwhile, non-essential federal employees are being asked to work without pay, and some employees who are typically exempt from a shutdown are being furloughed. But we're still in the early days, and there is a lot left to figure out about how the shutdown will affect individual states like Vermont. Here to talk it through with us, along with many local issues, is Vermont's Governor Phil Scott. He was sworn in January 2017 and has been reelected 4 consecutive times. Governor Scott, welcome back to the show.
Good afternoon, Michaela.
Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. And before we dive in here, I want to note that a lot of you have contacted us about the return to office order for state employees. And we are going to talk about some federal level issues first before we get to that, but we will discuss it a little later in the hour, I promise. So, Governor, the federal government shut down on October 1st. The last shutdown was in 2018. You were also governor back then. What do you see as the most significant impacts of a shutdown on Vermont?
Well, first of all, we've become accustomed to these threats year after year after year. So we've had a lot of practice in terms of trying to make sure we put ourselves in a financial position where we can weather a shutdown, and that's drawing down federal funds as much as possible. And I think our agencies and departments, as well as our financial folks in our office on the 5th floor, have done a pretty good job in doing that. So we're okay at this point in time, but we're talking, days and weeks, not months. And I think it's really, really unfortunate that they can't work together. We've become so polarized here in this country with a divided government, in terms of numbers. It just makes no sense for us not to find ways to work together. To do what's best for all Americans.
Well, it seems that Democrats in the House and Senate have decided that what could be best for all Americans is to institute this shutdown because they're trying to stop the Trump administration from implementing its agenda, which specifically includes some major cuts to federal spending on health care. Now, I know you opposed this move. You sent us a letter to Senate leaders calling for a temporary funding bill that would avoid a shutdown. And I wanted to read just a short bit of a response to that letter you sent from the head of the Vermont Democratic Party, May Hanlon.
First of all, Michaela, maybe you could go back to, the first part of the letter. That wasn't to capitulate and go to some sort of a reconciliation of some sort. It was for them to get their act together, come together, and pass a bill that works for Americans. So, going to the second part of the letter, I don't think it gives us credit for trying to do the right thing in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So step one you're saying was that you hoped that Democrats and Republicans could work together to find an agreement. That's a rare thing in Washington these days. So your second point was that if they couldn't come to an agreement, that Democrats should vote to avoid a shutdown. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, again, the head of the Vermont Democratic Party had some strong words about this. May Hanlon said the proposal Governor Scott would support codifies deep healthcare cuts that put Vermonters' lives at risk. Performative neutrality in the face of clear harm is not leadership. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts to that take on your statements.
Well, again, what we're facing right now isn't helpful to Vermonters or Americans in general, depending on how long this goes. So this could get worse before it gets better. Having some sort of a continuing resolution would buy time for them to come together on the bigger bill and come to grips with trying to find a solution that satisfies both parties. I would say, I'm not surprised that the Democratic Party itself came out with something like this, to try and further divide Vermonters and so forth. But I think Vermonters know me well enough, and if you read the entire letter, I think you understand that what I was saying was we as states, red and blue, have to come together at some point to pass bills and again, with Republicans and Democrats coming together to pass a bill that we can all live with. So we've been able to do that in Vermont. It's not easy, and it's something that can get a little rough, but at the end of the day, that's what we do, and that's what they need to do in Washington.
Well, Governor, let's turn to another federal level issue with state level implications, which is immigration. We got an email from Lois in Colchester who writes that they'd like to thank you for contracting to keep ICE detainees within the state of Vermont. Lois is referring to that new agreement, of course, that your administration signed with federal authorities last month around using state prisons to house federal detainees. Lois goes on to say, I'd like to know how the governor plans to prevent masked ICE personnel from taking people off the streets, out of their homes and workplaces with no notice, no charges, and no warrants. And I'm not sure here, but Lois might be referring to the arrest of 9 construction workers in Hardwick last week. It was one of a handful of mass arrest operations in Vermont in the last couple months, and the ICE agents didn't have any markings saying they were from ICE, and I believe were wearing masks as well. Do you see cause for concern with agents being unidentifiable?
Yes, I've said that consistently. I don't think the masks help the situation at all. I don't think doing this in the dead of night and these surprise kind of attacks, so to speak, are helpful to anyone. Many are here and just and I think in that situation they found at least one who was here legally, and I just think it's unfortunate that we can't find a path forward for those who are here safely to provide for their families and are trying to do the right thing and aren't hurting anyone, helping our economy. That there isn't a path forward for that, but the question was, what are we going to do about it? All we can do is push back as best we can, and not help in that situation by not doing things like authorizing the Guard to assist in this, and something that I push back against, and I don't think we should help in that way. I think the ICE should concentrate on those who are creating havoc, that are trying to do harm to our country and to our states, and I don't see that we have an abundance of that here in Vermont. So again, I think we need to protect our borders, but we have to be practical, compassionate, and do this in a logical way.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, these the folks who have been detained in Vermont are most often either farm workers or construction workers, not causing harm, as you said, but working here in the state. Is there anything that you, as our governor or state legislators, can do to block these types of federal immigration enforcements, or is this really out of Vermonters' hands?
It really is out of our hands in some respects. But as I mentioned, when they ask for to utilize the Guard to do some of this work, we declined. So those are things we can do, but they have a charge as well, and immigration is part of what they're supposed to be doing. And did we go too far? Probably in over the years in not protecting the borders. But here we are, and to work our way out of it, we can't do this overnight. And again, I hope we get to a point where we're using compassion, and we're really targeting those who are causing harm and wish our country ill will.
I'm glad you brought up the National Guard, because as many of our listeners have seen in the past month, President Trump has deployed Guard troops to several major U.S. cities, either to combat crime or quell protests about immigration enforcement. Now, Burlington, as much as we love it, is not necessarily a major U.S. city, but it is largely Democratic. There have been protests here against federal immigration enforcement. There are some issues with crime in Burlington. And we got a question about the hypothetical of President Trump deploying National Guard troops to Vermont, or Burlington specifically, from Josh in Shelburne, who writes, what would you do in the event that National Guard troops from another state are sent to Vermont, in particular to Burlington?
Well, we would oppose that, obviously, and we're working to assist Burlington at this point in time. This week, I'll be presenting a plan to the mayor, a short-term action plan that I think will move Burlington in the right direction. But the question that you have is something that I'm hopeful that they wouldn't do that. Protesting is a First Amendment right. If they were coming to Montpelier and taking over the State House, for instance, much like January 6th, then utilizing the Guard might be appropriate. But not from anything I've seen in Vermont in any way.
Mm-hmm. Well, on this topic of immigration enforcement, I want to ask you about a letter that Vermont received from the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi back in August. It basically said that Vermont is engaging in sanctuary policies that, quote, I'm quoting here, thwart federal immigration enforcement. And in your response, you wrote that, no, Vermont is not a sanctuary state because we don't have those laws or policies on the books. And I understand that you have not received any follow-up correspondence from the Attorney General's office since you wrote back to them. In your understanding, what is on the line for Vermont if the federal government does indeed deem the state a sanctuary jurisdiction?
Yeah, it's hard to know, with this administration, with this president, how he will react or how the administration will react to that. Obviously, we feel strongly we're not a sanctuary state. We have some cities and towns who have taken action to become sanctuary entities, but we have not done that on a statewide basis. So I think it's meritless, and we'll see. I mean, obviously, we would seek the courts to rectify that if that became the case.
Well, let's pause for a short break here. When we come back, I have a couple more questions about federal level policy for you, Governor Scott, and then we are also going to get to the conversation around the return to work order for state employees. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. If you're just tuning in, our guest this hour is Vermont's Governor, Phil Scott. When we left off, we were about to turn to a major topic of discussion among state government workers, which is the return to office order that Governor Scott issued in August. Under this order, state employees must work from the office at least 3 days a week starting in December. Now, as we heard during a Vermont Edition show we did back on the subject in mid-September, the order has spawned some pretty fierce pushback. More than 3,500 workers have signed a petition opposing the order, and ahead of today's show, we received nearly 100 emails on the subject. Our phone lines are also packed with people who want to weigh in on this. But first, Governor Scott, has this outcry in response to the order changed your position at all?
It hasn't changed my position. I understand the pushback from many. Is it easier to work remotely? Is it easier not to have to come in to an office and drive and get ready and so forth, and all the things that come in everyday lives to address while you're working? Sure, I get that. But I've never envisioned state government as being 100% remote. I think we owe it to taxpayers to be in the office so that they can approach their government and be there and see their people in person. So we came up with something that's in between. I mean, it started with a pandemic. We didn't have much choice then. We didn't know what we were facing. We had to go remote in order to continue with some of the operations. But I have to say as well, there's thousands of state employees who don't have this opportunity, never had, and can't. So we do have a bit of an equity issue there. But then along came the 2023 and 2024 floods, and that slowed down what we should have done after the pandemic, was some returning to work. So, we're at a point now where we can address recovery for our operations and as an employer, and I think we have an obligation to do so. So, I'm sensitive. I'm empathetic to some of their I guess outrage for some. But we also heard back from state employees who said, yeah, it's time everybody came back to work for at least, 3 days a week.
Well, let's hear from some state employees who have called in. Nelia is calling from North Carolina, actually. Nelia, go ahead.
That's correct. Thank you for taking my call.
Go ahead. What are your thoughts for Governor Scott?
Well, appealing to that empathy that he just mentioned, let me just state that I am working for the state of Vermont from North Carolina, and I would like to know what steps the governor has taken or put in place to accommodate people like me with available and affordable housing in less than 6 months, considering that it took me well over a year of being homeless before deciding to leave Vermont after the 2023 flood.
Nelia, thank you for calling in. Governor Scott?
Yeah, there's no doubt we have a housing crisis on our hands, but we're going to have to do both at the same time. For the last 10 years, I've been equally concerned about the housing crisis. We've worked to try and rectify that. We have a long ways to go there. But if we do for one, we have to do for others. If we're asking those who are living here in Vermont to come back for 3 days a week, I think we need to ask those living in North Carolina and Florida and Tennessee and other states to come back as well. I just think it's an equity issue.
I want to play a clip from a Vermont Edition interview from last month with Steve Howard, who's the executive director of the Vermont State Employees Association, and they represent about 6,000 state employees.
This is probably the worst time that this could be pursued, mostly because if you look at the research that the administration has done, their own research shows that 90% of state employees find that they collaborate effectively when working remotely. And 83% of those state employees believe that their performance is positively impacted by remote work. So at a time when the state has 899 vacant positions that have been vacant for quite some time, this is really the wrong time to make this kind of move, if there was ever a good time to do it.
So, Governor, I'd like us to address Steve's point about timing here. And the state has hundreds of vacant positions. And the concern that Steve is saying is that this could lead to more vacancies. Like our caller, Nelia, might not be able to make the move back to Vermont and potentially could quit. Why institute this order now?
Well, I think we've gone on, as I said before, I think we went on too long. I think we should have, soon after the pandemic, we should have instituted this policy to bring people back into the workplace. And then, as I said, the 23 and 24 floods happened. That slowed things down. But I think it's far past time that we do this. If we allow this to go further, and again, I'm not, the situation with the housing isn't going to be fixed overnight. We're going to need more cooperation from the legislature in order for that to happen. And so here we are, and I just don't think it's viable for us to continue as stewards of public dollars to move in this direction. And then we'd have to determine if that's what we're going to do. What do we do with our vacant buildings that we're continuing to heat, we're continuing to maintain? Do we sell all those buildings? Do we go to 100%? Remote work? I just don't think that's viable, and it's not equitable for everyone either.
Yeah. Was that on the table to sell some of the state's buildings? I know you have leases, long leases. Would it have involved breaking leases on some buildings where state employees work?
Well, I think we would have to do that if we continue with the number of people who want to work remote, we would have no choice but to do something about selling buildings and attempting to break leases.
Was that a big issue? I mean, would that have been a problem to break those leases, sell buildings? Was that part of the calculation?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, who do you sell them to? Look, I mean, you're Michaela, you're from this area. I mean, you've been down into Montpelier. I don't see a lot happening with the post office building, for instance. There's not, there's not a great pent-up demand for commercial office buildings at this point in time. Many private companies went remote, have downsized in some respects, but they've gone back to hybrid situations, which creates a glut of commercial properties that is here. But who's going to take those on?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to figure out if the main issue here was an equity issue, as you were saying, or an issue around real estate costs.
Well, it's not about one in particular. I think bringing employees back, I think it's as much about the human connection as anything. I think it's an important part of employee engagement, building a team. I've built a lot of teams in my life. I don't think I could build a team remotely. I think we need, especially with the demographics of our state, we're seeing many long-time state employees leaving because they're retiring, and we need to learn from them because we need the next generation to take over. So I think that's difficult to do when they're working from home. I think you just need that connection in order to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, let's bring in Nick from Burlington next. Nick, thanks for waiting on the line. What are your thoughts for Governor Scott?
Hi, Michaela. Thanks. And hi, Governor Scott. Like Michaela said, my name's Nick. I'm a state employee at the health department, calling in on my lunch break. And before I ask my question, it's a similar question to Amelia's earlier about affordability. I want to highlight that half of the time from the date that your order was announced to the date that it's supposed to take effect has passed already. And so I'm particularly concerned because the clock is ticking to answer critical questions and address profound concerns about your order. And one of my concerns is that affordability of living in Vermont and how this order restricts opportunities for current or potential state employees who live across the state. And my question is, how does your order make living in Vermont more affordable, especially for people living or who want to live in rural parts of the state?
Governor?
Well, again, I think we're looking at trying to do more regionalization. I know there's a group that's working on that right now, and it may not be ready by December 1, but we have regional offices all throughout the state, and there might be an opportunity to actually help out some of those rural communities by having people go back to work in their downtowns and the small villages and so forth, and be a part of the community. So not everything means that you have to come to, and this is something we're working our way through. We're not ready for this yet, but won't mean that you would have to come to Montpelier or Waterbury or Burlington or wherever. That's some of those established entities, but possibly going to some of the workstations throughout the state that are there and could be enhanced in order to provide an opportunity to get to those places and not have to travel quite as far.
Governor, it seems like a lot of the comments that we have received ahead of today's show and ahead of our conversation with Steve Howard from the Vermont State Employees Association center around frustrations with the process and timeline around this return to office order. I mean, we got one email today from a listener named Carmen who wanted to know why the State Employees Union wasn't included in conversations around the mandate and why state employees weren't asked about how a return to office would affect their lives before the mandate was made. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, to the reasoning behind how the process was implemented?
Again, we just came to a point where we knew we were going to do this. We wanted to do it back after the pandemic, and then the 23 and 24 floods came, and here we are today. It's not going to get any easier. The longer it goes, the more entrenched people are going to be. They'll never want to come back, and it'll get even more difficult. So we made the difficult decision in some respects to move forward with this, and we're going to stick with it. I would also ask, I mean, I know you've asked state employees to call in, and I know the
I have not
union
asked.
is active,
We did
but
specifically ask state employees to call in.
Well, I'm sure you encouraged in some respects, but having said that, the union has activated their forces in trying to create this uproar, and they've been successful in doing so. But I'm curious, the people I talk to on the streets every day, they don't understand what the big deal is. They have to go to work themselves, and they wonder, why is this being resisted in such a big way? So I would, put it out there to others who are listening. What are your thoughts? What does the everyday Vermonter think about what we're asking state employees to do with their tax dollars?
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, Governor, I'm reading our language about promoting today's show, and it says, we want to ask the governor about the high cost of healthcare in Vermont, his return to office order for state employees, and more. But we really want to hear your questions for him, too. Email Vermont Edition. So I would love as well to hear from folks who support this order. We have not yet received those messages, but we are very open to them, and if we receive them, I will read them on air or invite somebody onto the phone lines to discuss. I'm going to take one more call on this topic, and then I think it's probably time for us to move on, and it's going to be Sherry in Williamstown. Sherry, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Governor Scott, I wanted to say that I have always appreciated everything that you do for our state. My concern, though, is that we are, as state employees, supposed to return to the office 3 days a week in December. This is a time of year where the cold weather hits, and we have a lot of homeless folks who don't have a place to sleep at night. And if we have all of these vacant buildings, why can't we turn those into homeless shelters to allow these folks to get a hand up instead of a hand out?
Thank you, Sherry. Governor Scott?
Well, again, that's a totally separate issue. We're addressing that with emergency shelters and making our way through that. Do we have enough at this point in time? Probably not, but we're making ground up on that and working with some of the community action centers to accomplish this. For instance, in Rutland, the Loretto House is going to be utilized for this purpose, and they're working to renovate in order to accommodate that. It's not a situation where you can just open up an office building and let people in. There'd have to be a lot of renovations to doing that. We think congregate shelters are the best approach. Instead of putting them into hotels and motels where we aren't able to engage with them and provide some other services that they might need and put them in harm's way in many other aspects. So again, it's not as easy as that, but I appreciate the thought and the question. But then it gets down to, again, the money that we spent to do that, we simply don't have. And we need to reduce our costs in terms of the homeless population.
Yeah. Well, Sherry, thank you for helping us transition into our next topic, which is housing. Governor, a couple weeks ago, you signed an executive order that aims to speed up housing production. If the legislature votes this session to invest more state dollars than it already does in housing projects, especially in light of the high construction costs and the tariffs and the rollback of federal grant programs for housing, would you support additional investment?
Well, we'll see. I mean, we're trying to present our budget at this point in time. We think that We need to focus on regulatory reform, which the legislature didn't address 100% in the last session. Without it, it's going to be difficult to build any housing that we desperately need, regardless of the amount of money we have. So I think that's what we should be focusing on, but we would contemplate anything as long as it doesn't mean raising taxes and making Vermont more unaffordable. We would take a look at it, but we're getting ahead of our proposals as well. We'll be presenting that to the legislature, our budget in January.
Well, while we're talking high costs, I do want us to return briefly to the issue of healthcare, since it's such a huge one here in Vermont right now and nationwide. I mean, Vermonters, as they've no doubt heard, pay higher insurance premiums than pretty much any other state. And just recently, these two private insurers, Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Healthcare, announced they're leaving the Medicare Advantage market next year. Vermont's healthcare advocate Mike Fisher says that the Medicare Advantage marketplace in the state has collapsed. What policies will your administration focus on in the next legislative session that could help ease the burden of the cost of healthcare in Vermont? I know there were a number of laws passed last session that did try to do this. Are there more coming?
Yeah, again, Medicare Advantage, I believe that was for the individual markets, so
Yes.
They haven't completely abandoned the states. I think it's important for people to not be fearful that those who have Medicare Advantage through a larger entity and not individually are okay. And so that's, I just want us to report things, right, so we don't get further the rhetoric out there that things are collapsing. But there's no doubt that we have to do much, much more in terms of healthcare. As I said, we're working with the Green Mountain Care Board and other entities, the hospitals and so forth, to do what we can within our means. And so I'm confident that we will be able to again get to a place where we can reduce costs, but we're going to have to look at overhead costs and some of the entities to do that, not duplicating services throughout the state. It's not unlike our situation with education. We have a declining population in some respects of under the age of 65, and so that means in the healthcare market there's fewer healthier people paying for all the rest of us. So we have to rectify that. We have to turn that around. We need to grow the population. We need to bring more people in to grow the economy, and those are things we'll continue to focus on.
We received a number of emails on this topic ahead of today's show. One person writes that they've paid into Medicare their whole working life and am now on it. And in 2026, there will be no more Advantage plans available in most of Vermont. And they're very worried about having higher copays and deductibles. And they wonder, how did this come about? And do you have any plans to fix this, which you have already addressed in part, Governor? But I do wonder, I think a lot of people are still trying to untangle this complicated healthcare web and say, how did we get in this place? How is Vermont in such a particularly tough spot? Is there any one or two things that you point to as you try to untangle this?
I would have to ask the Department of Financial Regulation. I know that they're working on this to provide other opportunities for those who've lost their coverage or are going to lose their coverage. So they're on it. And in terms of, I don't know whether this was a nationwide effort or it was just Vermont. I would assume that there are other states who might be impacted, that these companies felt that their market wasn't lucrative enough for them, or possibly losing money. So we're going to have to work our way through this and find other entities that will provide this service to Vermonters and for the rest of the Americans who deserve that helping hand after retiring.
Governor Phil Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Michaela.
All right, we have to take one more quick break, but when we come back, we are going to debrief with Vermont Public's senior political reporter, Bob Kinzel. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. If you're just joining us, we just spoke with Governor Phil Scott about a whole lot of issues, from federal immigration policy to the controversial return to office order for state employees. Here to help us debrief the conversation for the rest of the hour is Vermont Public's senior political reporter, Bob Kinzel. He's been listening from our Montpelier bureau. Bob, hi.
Hey, Michaela.
All right, let's start with the return to office order, if we could. I imagine it's something you have been hearing a lot about recently, being in Montpelier. What were your main takeaways from the governor's reactions to our calls and emails?
It's definitely a big issue in Montpelier, and it's really an issue that has several sides in Montpelier. One, you hear it from state employees who like remote work, and they like to continue to do that if possible 4 or 5 days a week. They don't want to come back into the office 3 days a week. The flip side of that is the Montpelier business community, for the most part, would like to see the state employees come back, because it makes a big difference to have a lot of foot traffic in downtown Montpelier during the week. And so it's something that we hear a lot about. And I thought the governor today made it very clear. We are going to stick with it, I think was his quote. That they're taking into consideration some of the comments they've heard from state employees. There may be some exceptions here and there on a review basis, but for the most part, the administration and the governor were saying, hey, that December 1st deadline, when folks are coming back at least 3 days a week, that is going to happen. Now, what I wonder is, as we get closer to that date, perhaps in several weeks, will the state employees union take any legal action to try to block it? And there are some avenues that are open to them. Whether or not they'll be successful is yet to be determined. But that could be sort of the next step in this battle over state employees coming back to their offices.
And we talked a bit with the governor about the issue of real estate, too. One listener wrote in, Amy, noting that there was a decision to sell a state office building in downtown Burlington last year, and hundreds of Department of Health employees were sent to a new office location at the Waterbury State Office Complex, which has about 1/3 of the workspaces the Burlington location had. And we've gotten other emails from folks wondering, was this a decision based around real estate or more around other issues that the governor brought up, like equity, for example? These state office buildings well, Bob.
Sure.
What do you think?
And just to complicate matters further,
sure.
The state is in the process of trying to flood-proof these main state buildings in the next several years. So far, there have been some temporary solutions from the floods in terms of electrical, in terms of elevators, in terms of computers. And there's a massive project out there that's under consideration that would basically flood-proof 3 or 4 of the main Montpelier buildings. That's going to be a cost of, at least $250 million. And FEMA may pay for some of it, but we don't know these days exactly what FEMA is paying for and what it's not. Some of it may be paid by private insurance companies. Some will have to come from the state. So all this is happening at a time when the administration is trying to do a long-term plan for these state buildings. As the governor referenced, the federal building downtown where the post office used to be, the post office moved out and determined that it was not feasible for them to go back. There are no offices in that building right now. A lot of speculation about what might happen to the federal building. Will it be turned down? Will it be torn down, rather? Will it be rebuilt with some retail on the first floor and some apartments on the second floor? So there's a lot in this mix that's going on, but I would think real estate is not the primary cause that the administration is fighting for right now. They really believe there's better collaboration. We've heard the governor say this over and over again since this policy was announced. They really feel having people in the office leads to better collaboration, and that as more and more private businesses are requiring their employees to come back to work, it's appropriate for the state to do the same. That's their argument. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm curious what's going to happen next, because that December 1st deadline is fast approaching. But I mean, if we look to other states, and California's governor pushed for 4 days in the office and ended up cutting a deal with unions to limit that mandate. Texas's governor tried to ban telework, but eventually allowed agencies to develop remote work policies. So still some time left, though Governor Scott says that his opinion has not changed.
I could see something like that happening in Vermont, where they get together with the union and say, okay, in these agencies, we really think it's important to have people here 3 days a week. Here's another one. Maybe this department, we could go to 2 days a week. So there might be some negotiation over that.
Yeah. Well, while we have you, Bob, I do want to talk about some of these federal level issues that are going on. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have Senator Peter Welch on the show tomorrow to discuss the federal government shutdown, and you're in frequent contact with all three members of Vermont's congressional delegation. From your point of view, do you think there is any movement around negotiations going on Capitol Hill?
There sure doesn't seem to be.
Nope.
At this point, does there?
No.
I think this is going to play out for the next week or so, and then we'll see what kind of agreement might be reached. I think the governor is in an interesting position. As you mentioned, the letter that he wrote calling for Congress to pass an appropriations bill. Well, that actually hasn't happened for several years, and that's why we're always dealing with continuing resolutions. And then he said, if you can't come up with a long-term plan, at least pass this continuing resolution. And that is something that our delegation is fighting very strongly, and they want to see the Affordable Care Act subsidies included in any continuing resolution. So I don't know where the give is on this. And I noticed that the Republicans, one of their talking points is, hey, open up the government and we'll talk about the subsidies. And the Democrats are saying, we don't trust you. We'll agree to open the government up, and then we'll start discussing policies to extend the subsidies and other parts of Medicaid, and Republicans may or may not agree to it. So I think really right down to it is there's an element of trust. And the other thing the Democrats are saying is, if we pass a continuing resolution, can we be assured that President Trump will not promote a rescission of some of these budgets? And they don't trust the Trump administration either. So this is, it's a dicey situation. You have to wonder where the middle ground here is. Maybe the Republican Speaker of the House, Speaker Johnson, will have to say, yes, we will consider the Obamacare subsidies in separate legislation. I am pledged to that. And maybe the Democrats will go along with it. But right now, boy, it's really an impasse, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I on that note about rescissions, I have a question that I was going to ask Governor Scott. We ran out of time, so I'm going to ask you instead. You can be our stand-in. In August, Bob, Trump cut this federal program that was going to provide solar benefits to low-income households. And Vermont lost more than $62 million that was already promised to the state. And my question for the governor, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, is when the president rolls back congressionally appropriated funds like that, big amounts of money, $62 million, does that cause difficulties when creating a budget for the state? Or are these things that, Vermont only would have done if it got federal dollars?
I think these are specific projects that needed federal dollars, but it certainly has a rippling effect throughout the state government. And the question also might be, will there be legal challenges to some of these rescissions? Now, in some cases, I think there have been legal challenges, and courts have ruled that the administration is within its authority to do so. In other cases, it's still not clear if that's possible. I think that, really we were talking about the federal shutdown. This is kind of at the heart of what's happening with the federal shutdown. And that's, yes, the Democrats care very much about the Obamacare subsidies and the changes to Medicaid that will result in people leaving the program. They care about those very much. But on top of that, I've heard from both Senator Welch and Representative Balint and also Senator Sanders, there's this underlying feeling and anger at what the Trump administration has done with budget rescissions. It's one thing not to support a program. It's another to have Congress appropriate the money for the program and then have the president say, not so fast. I've decided that money isn't going to be spent in that program. And I think that is really sort of the underlying foundation that the Democrats are really angry about. And one of the reasons why they're taking the stand that they are right now with the continuing resolution.
Mm-hmm. And I should also acknowledge that Vermont Public has some skin in the game here, having seen much of our funding rescinded from the federal government. If you listened to our Pledge Week last week, you probably heard a little bit about that. All right, Bob, with a couple minutes that we have left here, is there anything else that stood out to you from what Governor Scott said during today's conversation?
Well, Governor Scott has never been very enthusiastic about calling out the National Guard when Vermont was asked, and he said no. So he made that pretty clear. You raised the issue about Burlington. Could President Trump say, hey, Burlington, crime is out of control. We've got to send in the National Guard. And the governor's very clear that is not a position that he would support, and I would think that most Vermonters would agree with him on that.
Yeah, but it sounds like it might be something that's out of a state's control at this point, whether or not the National Guard comes here.
I think it's in the courts, and we're seeing that sort of today, both in the cases of Illinois with the Guard in Chicago and in Portland, Oregon, where federal judges, at least in Oregon, have said, no, this is not appropriate. So it's a story that's unfolding for us.
Yeah, and in Washington, D.C., where there were many publicized stories about the National Guard being there, it's a bit of a different situation since the district is not a state and it has more federal control than places like Portland, Oregon, or Memphis, right?
That's right, and the courts have recognized those changes.
Yeah. All right, Bob. We got a lot of work to do, a lot of leads to follow. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
It's always my pleasure.
That was Bob Kinzel, Vermont Public's senior political reporter from our Montpelier Bureau. All right, well, that is all the time we have for today's conversation. But tomorrow, I just want to remind you again that we are going to be talking with Senator Peter Welch. We'll be focused on the impacts of the federal government shutdown on Vermont and also talking about any inside scoops he has for us on negotiations around the shutdown. If you have questions for Senator Welch, you can email them to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. After that conversation, we'll be discussing the drought that has been ravaging Vermont's lakes, streams, farm fields, and the like this summer. It's had a pretty incredibly detrimental effect on farmers in our region, and we're going to hear from some of them in different parts of the state about how it affected crops and animals and their overall work and quality of life. And again, if you are a farmer or you have thoughts on how the drought has been affecting you, maybe you have a well, want to tell us about that, you can email vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. All right, today's show was directed by Mary Angish. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Today's call screener was Kelly Delorier, and our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.